Welcome to Licensed Poetics, a podcast where we talk about stories. I'm your host, Ling.
And I'm your host, Achim.
We have a very, very exciting guest with us today, a guest that the whole world has been waiting for. The day is finally happening. I present the one and the only Marlene.
The most exciting drop yet.
Yes, very much so. As usual, we will give Marlene's detailed bio later on in this episode. For now, I'll just say that she is a fantastic writer and book lover, and she is one of our best friends and our inspiration.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
That's absolutely true.
Welcome to the podcast. We're very excited to have you.
I feel very welcome. I'm very excited.
Okay, let's just jump straight into our reading updates. I'll go first. I've been having a slow reading fortnight, I'll admit, mostly because I find myself in the middle of way too many books at once. A few of the major books I've been reading also are not cozy, easy reads at all. And they're difficult, but they are rewarding. And also because my health isn't at 100% recently. And then it's funny because my friend suggested that I should just read more to make myself feel better. And then I'm like, but the books I read are also so sad. It's a nightmare. But anyway, I'll talk about the 3 main books that I'm reading right now. The first one is one that I mentioned on this podcast before, 1,000 Years of Good Prayers by Yi-Yun Lee. It's a short story collection about modern China, and I actually find short story collections to be really hard to get through. I don't know if you ever felt that, because like the stories are so short and there's no connection between one and the next. So I don't feel compelled to like find out what's going on in the end. And so I end up just like taking months and months to finish.
Fragmented.
To finish one short story collection.
Yeah, I really do prefer short story collections that are like connected in some way. It feels like it's building up to something.
Right. Yeah. And another book is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. It's a dark fantasy adventure story, typical Neil Gaiman style. And it's about a guy discovering there are 2 Londons. There's London above and London below. Mm-hmm. And as far as I can tell, London below has this strange, dark, medieval vibe. And it has magic, it seems. I'm about 20% into the book right now, and it's pretty solid so far.
I think it's one of his earlier work.
Definitely, I can see that, yeah.
How do you think his writing style was compared to some of her later work?
That's a good question. But as far as I can tell, I don't think his writing style has changed that much, at least between Neverwhere and the other books I've read, like The Graveyard Book or The Ocean at the End of the Lane. Mm-hmm. It's mostly the way he built his character. The protagonist in Neverwhere is a young man, and you can tell it's a self-insert. and you can tell he wrote it when he was a little bit younger as well. Yeah. He has
I mean, the thing is with writing is like it's always a self-insert. It's just how obvious it is.
That is so
The more
true.
skilled you get, the more obscure and like complicated it is to kind of like decrypt it. But it's always there.
Yeah. And you know, like when it's a bit too obvious, you're like, okay. Yeah. Okay, I see what you're doing.
It kind of like ruins your immersion in
a
the story,
bit.
right?
The final book I'll mention is, if you're friends with me in real life, you will definitely have heard me talk about this book. And I briefly mentioned it in our previous episode
and
as well.
post about it.
Yeah. And it is none other than The Unwomanly Face of War by Svetlana Alexievich. It is an oral history of women from the USSR fighting in World War II. And Svetlana Alexievich is a Belarusian writer. She wrote the book in Russian, and it was translated by the prestigious translators Richard Pavier and Larisa Volonkovsky. And oh boy, when I tell you this book is hard to read, it's so depressing, and literally every time I pick it up to read, within 2 pages, I'm crying.
Why do you do that to yourself?
Exactly. So it's not a book that I pick up to feel good. You know, it's a huge emotional commitment. I know I'm going to be devastated. Sometimes within just like half a page, I start crying.
Oh, so you can forget about your body part is not working.
What makes this book extraordinary is that it focuses on women's perspective on war. And because war is such a male-centric branch of history, and there's this idea that war is made by men and written by men. Especially in the USSR, they celebrate Victory Day. the day that commemorates their winning World War II. And it's a huge deal. And they love talking about the heroes of war, winning battles and defeating the enemy. All of that is very important, of course, but that's not the full story. And the quote on the back cover of this book actually says, "Women's war has its own colors, its own smells, its own lighting, and its own range of feelings, its own words." So the author tracks down women who fought in the war as soldiers, snipers, pilots, and goes to interview them. She's done hundreds or even thousands of interviews, and she approaches the women from a very human angle. She's not only interested in their medals and decorations, but she looks at old photos and listens to the human details. She says when she approaches an interviewee, she starts the conversation in their homes, usually discussing hairstyles and recipes. And then she patiently waits for the conversation to take a turn towards war. One woman, and all of the women's names are listed in the book actually, said that all the girls in her village were so excited to go to the front because there are no men left. And all the girls, they just wanted to go to the front. They didn't even care where. And their mothers would send them off at the train station crying. But they were so young. And she said she even grew a few centimeters in height during the war. And then before she left, she put away her favorite dress and chopped off her braids. Another woman said that she had her first period at the front.
Wow.
And then she didn't know what it was. And she was freaking out because she thought she was shot.
Oh.
And her commander had to explain to her what it was.
A man?
Yes. Yeah. And then another woman, she was a pilot, and she said it was springtime and she went into a forest to look for strawberries. But she saw some burned German bodies. And she was so scared because she had only ever taken place in a battle from above, from her jet. And she had never seen a dead body up close before. And so she was profoundly traumatized by what she saw in the forest. And then during the process of the author writing this book, she encountered so many obstacles because a lot of people were upset by what she's trying to do because it humanizes the people in the war and it does not make them into glorious heroes. This is really sad, but sometimes she'll approach a married couple who were both at the front. And then sometimes the husband will say to the wife, "Oh, when this journalist comes in tomorrow, make sure you tell the right version of the war to her. Make sure you don't bore her with all the boring details that you like to remember."
Oh.
Yeah.
Boy.
It's crazy. And then that's why the author says that she tries her best to speak to the women alone without interference. A woman said she was 18 years old at the front, and she basically had a romantic encounter with another soldier. She said that they were on duty that night. He was around 20 years old. And then he said to her, "Are we really going to die now without knowing love?" And then, at least from what she said, I don't think he forced anything. I think it was just an innocent romantic encounter. But then the woman ended up being really upset that the author was going to publish this. I guess she was expecting the author to edit this bit out because it will be considered shameful or not worth mentioning. And she was angry and said, "My son sees me as a war hero. What will he think of me now if he reads this?"
Oh, it's saddening.
I know, it's so ridiculous, right?
Yeah, it's really quite complicated to navigate the ethics of, sharing other people's trauma and interpreting it.
I think that's the major difference between men and women is that men they're defined by the battles they've won, their titles, their legacy. My point being, if you're men having an affair, it doesn't matter, right? Because it doesn't define who you are. All these battles you won, they define who you are.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the same as the point you're making, but there's this kind of hypocrisy whereby men can be seen quite easily for the greatness of their achievement, whatever their career trajectory or whether it's military war or whatever. And then on the other hand, if you're a woman and you have anything remotely close to a salacious romantic encounter, that becomes your whole identity if you're in the public sphere.
Yeah.
Exactly, that's right.
I think you articulated that really beautifully, Marlene. The final point about this book is that I think it's a really good book to read to learn about writing because in it you can see very clearly the raw materials versus the craft. the raw materials are the women's words, and then the craft is the way that the author organized everything and presented it. And then it made me realize like what makes a compelling book is not just how sad the raw material is. It's very much like the skill of the author.
Thanks for sharing. That was super interesting.
That was super deep. So I find myself in a similar situation where I didn't really have any time to read this past 2 weeks. I mean, been mostly writing a lot. Just
that's good.
We stand that.
Yeah.
Achim is trying to make Slay cool again.
Yes, so
it's affected all of us.
I feel like it's already showing my age somehow, but I don't know what to replace it with to be cool and young.
Our listeners, if you're a Gen Z, let me know. What do you say? So I've been listening to this audiobook on Spotify called Mythos, the Greek mythology retold by Stephen Fry.
Oh, I know that one.
Yeah, you do.
I've listened to this.
Really? It was trending on Spotify, right?
Oh.
Is that how you?
Recently, I listened to it probably like 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, really? I think like the first direct impact it had on me is that it made me realize how much of an influence the Greek mythology had on our daily culture and our language itself. Basically, how like everything is named. And also, Stephen Fry's navigation, his narrative on the mythology is quite groundbreaking. So it's like quite different from how I used to remember stories when I was a kid. He really added like a lot more personalized details and nuances to those old tales.
Wait, do you mean did he write like accompaniment essays to them, or just the way he read them?
No, he's reinventing the mythology.
Oh, okay,
yes.
Okay.
Like, does he make it more contemporary, or does he kind of relate it to modern life or something?
Yes, very much. So he quoting modern day quotes. He's relating it to our normal like daily behaviors.
Okay, so it is still like a short story collection then.
Yes, it's like So it's like this whole Greek mythology told from the very beginning, from this nothing but chaos, and then it spans into like the creation. Back to the origin of language. There's like a really interesting section I wanted to mention is that that the original heavenly father Uranos, we know him better as Uranus. He was the governor of heaven, but he was overthrown by his son Kronos, and he was banished to the darker realm as far away as it could be from his realm. It was in his narrative. He was saying that all this spite, all this rage that he produced, embedded into the rocks and into the earth, and waiting to be rediscovered by a race so foolish that they try to harness the power of uranium. I never thought that correlation would exist, like Uranus and uranium.
Is that really how the word uranium came to be?
I think so. Yeah, I think like both scientists and I guess physicists, they consult with mythologists.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but even if it's not, it's still a really cool connection. I think
that is mind blowing. That's so cool.
Wow, like a species foolish enough to mess with Uranus,
which is human.
I mean uranium. I was building up to that joke.
Yes,
good setup.
Oh, it's really cool. And then also, I noticed like how he made all these gods to be really human-like, or should I say humans are made to be godlike? Because
yeah, in the Greek mythology, like the notion of gods are much more flawed. In fact, they're like fundamentally flawed, and so like it's a very different view from like monotheistic religion where it's like daddy knows everything. It's really cool.
And then don't get me wrong, this the Greek mythology, the whole story is all patriarchal, right?
Totally. Yeah. With Zeus just like,
I mean, like
daddy knows everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, he totally is that guy. Yeah, but like at least I feel like the Greek mythology is kind of self-aware that he sucks as well.
Yes. So it does have this awareness of making all the gods, they have flaws. They can make mistakes. They can get jealous, which in a way it also makes it more relatable. Just the fact of being patriarchal and this recurring theme of patricide. It's like killing one's father and just overthrowing the
Really?
dynasty. Yeah.
I don't know much about it, but like
Really?
that's not. I don't know much about.
I mean, the
mythology at all.
Oedipus story is like that, isn't it? It's like a concept in pretty like Freudian psychology, the Oedipus complex, which is where like you know, you want to fuck your mom. Can I say that?
yeah. And kill your dad.
Well, yeah, because I didn't know about the kill your dad part until I like heard Mythos.
How do you fuck your mom if you haven't killed your dad?
What the fuck?
Yeah, there's a logistical issue.
A logistical issue.
I don't know what you call it.
This is a very explicit podcast. By this like really early age stages, I think they're still experimenting with this like family affairs with morals, with repercussions and consequences. I guess like, oh, what if I kill my dad? What's gonna happen? I guess that's what they're trying to like. They're trying.
Is
to
it
find
bad
out.
things or?
That being said, like I still see the male gods that they play more like important roles in the story, whereas like you have the Earth Mother Gaia.
Oh,
Which
it's
is
Gaia
like-
from Greek mythology.
That's right. That's right.
Oh.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
so she is one of the fundamental principles. So she's like a primordial deity, which is not a god or a goddess or anything. So she is like basically one of the few that's spun from chaos itself. So she doesn't really have like a personality or character to her. It's just
What
like,
does this say
it's just
about
it's just like a
gender
machine
in
that
society?
that gives birth. It's just
Oh,
yeah,
good.
it's like really sad.
me and Feng Ling love it.
Yeah, so it's like worse. It's worse than a background character. It's like
Honestly,
Yeah.
machine.
that's like the view of women summed up in a nutshell. That's
Yes.
why like I want to get into studying like the Himalayan cultures because like some of them are matriarchal. I want to know what that's like. Maybe that'll be my
Yeah.
big topic next.
What's the Himalayan culture? It's like
Not Tibetan, the other one. I
the
can't remember.
Bigfoot.
Yeah, Bigfoot. Bigfoot society is intensely matriarchal.
No, that's also there's some like really cute things that I found. There's one section about the Hermes, which is the 12th and the last member of the Olympian godhood. It's like he is the inventor of alliteration, which is one of my favorite
Nice.
literary tool. So
Nice.
I think just within a couple hours,
I feel like alliteration is not that hard to invent.
I love that.
It's what I'm
Marlene was
trying to look
thinking,
for.
do you need to even invent
Did he-
alliteration?
Did he like patent it? Like,
So this is arguably the first alliterated sentence that's ever spoken.
is it
Bye, bye,
Goo-Goo-Ga-Ga?
Marlene, you invented Goo-Goo-Ga-Ga. You have to patent it.
What is Goo-Goo-Ga-Ga? So it says, the close confines of this cramped cavern are occasioning me with this uncomfortably acute claustrophobia.
Ooh. I love the word occasioning as a verb.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds like something you'd write. That's
Thank
really cool.
It does
thank
a
you.
little bit. Hey.
Thank you.
Yeah.
At the same time, he also invented the phobia words.
Mm. that
not
makes
Stephen
sense.
Fry, right? The other guy.
Yeah.
The last one of
Hermes.
the Olympus.
Because the phobia ones, they're all like Greek, aren't they?
Yeah.
The
Philic,
etymology.
philia.
Yeah.
And phobia.
So yeah, that's it for my reading update. Thanks for listening.
Cool. I'll dive in. I'm always reading too many books at once, but I'll select some that are kind of like around a theme. I guess lately I've been really into, I like the term you used earlier, which was like cozy reading. So very like simple, like slice of life stuff.
That's good.
Yeah, and especially ones that like are kind of Australian contemporary fiction, I guess, because obviously you both know I'm planning to move countries at some point this year. And I think on some level I'm just kind of, you know, feeling the anticipatory grief of doing so. So I find myself very like attached to and drawn to things that are based in Australia. And so this one that I'm reading is called Friends and Dark Shapes by an Australian author. Her name is Kavita Bedford. And it's really just about like life in Sydney. It follows a bunch of like late 20-somethings, early 30-somethings, moving into a share house in Redfern. At the same time, the protagonist of the story is dealing with like the grief and loss of her father. So that's kind of the opening sentence of the book is like, last year after my dad died, we moved into a share house. And it kind of goes into just like the life of the character and the rest of everyone. I'm still like early, maybe like a third through it. So I don't yet know what it builds up to. But I find it really interesting because like most of the book so far is pretty like light and just like full of these like beautiful Sydney details about like Redfern, and yeah, it is fiction. It's positioned as like a novel. And I guess like the interesting thing about this author, I found out about her because I went to this event called like Writers of Color Writing Nature, and I'm really interested in nature writing. So I saw her at Bankstown, and she had this beautiful essay I really loved. And I found it interesting when I picked up this book. I didn't know what to expect. I thought I'd read about like nature stuff, but it's much more about just like, you know, living in the city.
It sounds
as
like
a
share
young
house kind of thing.
Exactly. And then I realized like I think the connection here is more about this like connection to your place and all the details within it and the people and how they live there and what they speak like and all those like little behaviors. That's what I realize I really love about this like slice of life type fiction, although like in some ways it seems kind of, I guess, shallower or simpler.
Do you think it's kind of like a vlog in that way?
Oh, I guess so. Yeah,
Okay.
in some ways.
That's fun. Do you think processing her grief is like shown through all the slices of life or it doesn't really come back?
So this is something I did really want to talk about. The interesting thing, at least up to the point that I'm reading, is it's not obvious. It's not like the main beat of the story, for example. It kind of just like floats up to the surface very occasionally. And I actually thought about this because like I wrote a short story which was kind of about a similar thing, which is about like processing grief, but like the story isn't really about the grief or the loss or whatever. It's just the character moving through life. And I find that really good stories about grief don't make it like the main obvious thing because the biggest struggle about grieving something is like you have to go through normal life and pretend to be a normal human being. You're just following these people and this person is having normal thoughts or whatever, but it's just this like one layer above or detached from everything.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm feeling about it so far. It's just like a little bit more detail. It feels very nice to see someone like lovingly labor over describing a place accurately. That's what I really like, especially because it's like Sydney, Australia. Like there's more novels about like New York or whatever. And it's just really nice to see a little bit of, you sound so like narcissistic and lame, but it is nice to read about things that feel like
that
it's
you
your
recognize,
life.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That you can resonate with. This is one of my like New Year resolutions is to read more Australian stories. Yeah.
Fine.
Oh, by the way, there's a burger place in Redfern called Suburgia. It's like one of my favorite burger places. Before I went vegetarian, and then they named all their burgers using suburb in Sydney.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
That's
it's so cool.
interesting.
Yeah.
Have to check it out now.
So as you can probably guess, like Newtown or these areas they're like
Vegan burgers.
Is right, yeah. And is Blacktown just like a doner kebab and a burger?
That's iconic.
The other thing is I've been trying to read more poetry lately. So I picked up a couple poetry collections. This one is called The Bloody Country by Susie Anderson, and she got the Black and White Fellowship winner. So I think she's like an indigenous writer. And again, I think it's kind of in this theme of like relating to place and interpreting that in different ways and exploring your relationship with it. There was one poem that I really like in it, which maybe sounds really stupid, but basically she spends a whole poem just talking about like she's on an airplane and there's like a bunch of, you know, bogans and people that she just doesn't like on the airplane and they're just making this noise and being assholes and being really inconsiderate. And then she imagines like what it would be like to know that this plane ride was her last, as in if the plane crashed and she had to die with everyone on that plane.
That she doesn't
and then,
like.
That she doesn't like.
Oh.
But the thing is, she ends the poem with this like beautiful sense of like compassion for her fellow man. She's like, even if I hate all of you beeps, like if we were to be in that situation, like we'd just have to be in it together, and we'd be like, you know, the only humans sharing that experience. So it's a bit weird to explain as like a story, but I read that poem and I was like, there's something in that I really relate to, and it's hard to explain.
That's very real. I think that's very honest.
Well, because I think, to me, like the true root or the true meaning of being compassionate is that accepting that there are a lot of people that you just don't like, but you're going to have to accept on some level that you are made of the same things. And you experience the same suffering, and you're all going to die and all of that. So,
And I guess like a plane crash is like a good way to bring about that feeling. Like,
yeah.
It's gonna be like a good way to go out, you know. It's like you.
Is
go
well, you I guess you'd rather like go out
than alone,
and also then like hating everyone.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
you're saying it's just like a cope.
That's funny. That's a great update.
That's
Thanks.
really nice.
That's everything for my reading update.
Cool.
Beautiful.
Okay, that's it for our reading updates. And now let's move on to the second section.
Marlene Baquiran is a Filipino-Australian writer residing in Gadigoland with a background in technology and sustainability. Her writing deals with creating meaning and climate issues, including her publication in the next issue of the nature-focused journal Island magazine. She believes in the power of writing to instigate change through curiosity and empathy, founding the grassroots climate advocacy group Climate Writers, for which she won the Edna Ryan Award in community activism.
Here we have prepared a topic that Marlene is interested in, and that is literary hooks or narrative hook. And I guess before we jump in, I'll just provide the Wikipedia definition of what a hook is. It says here that it is a literary technique in the opening of a story that hooks the reader's attention so that they will keep on reading. The opening may consist of several paragraphs for a short story or several pages for a novel, but ideally it is the opening sentence in the book.
Because that's something, I guess the context as to why I was interested in this is like, as someone who writes, especially when you're very early on, you tend to get a bit too absorbed in like, you know, your flowery language or whatever it is, and starting from the beginning, etc. It can be quite comfortable to start in the middle of something instead.
Yeah.
And I feel like fundamentally that's what a really great hook does. It like drops you just in the deep end of something.
Yeah, exactly.
Into a situation of conflict and ambiguity that really gets someone interested to find out more of the details. And that reader is like hoping that you'll disclose more about this very weird or interesting thing.
It's like you gotta hook them in so that they're waiting for the resolution in the end, so that they keep going.
It's a good sign to show like a good promise in the opening scene, and then later on you meet it with your resolution.
Exactly. Yeah. Another example I prepared for this. It's not much a promise, but it is definitely like a conflict of sorts. And the word I used is like a philosophical proposition. So sometimes in a novel, right, maybe the character makes a monologue, or maybe just the author gives like a little mini essay almost describing a philosophical position. And then the story happens, and then you see that it's actually a discussion in response to that philosophical thing. And then in the end, it provides an argument for or against it. The example is actually The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. If you don't know, it's a book about teenagers who have cancer. And in the beginning, the main character basically makes a speech in favor of nihilism. She says that we're all going to die and no one's going to be remembered. And even if you are remembered, it doesn't mean anything. So might as well just take a nihilistic approach to life. And then things happen in the book, and then eventually you realize that the book is arguing that, yes, even though everything dies in the end, loving deeply in your lifetime is still worth it. So it's very much like throwing it out in the beginning. Hey, we should do nihilism. And then in the end, the argument is like, nihilism, no good. We want to love. And like, yeah.
And that is essentially a character development.
It is. It is a character arc. But it's also a hook as well, I think, because it's in the beginning.
Yeah.
Some readers might read that immediately go, I don't agree with it. I wonder if the author's gonna argue against it or not. Like, and then, or maybe the reader's like, oh, wait, I agree with it. I wonder what the author's gonna say next.
Yeah. You're trying to like kind of provoke the reader
a little bit. Yeah.
It's like this protagonist starts off with like a misbelief, and then later on they overcome it.
Learn something.
That's like your traditional hero's journey. And then if they deepen that misbelief, and then they become the anti-hero.
It feels like it can be a tricky balance, because like when you kind of start a book or anything with like a philosophical proposition, it can also get quite tedious quite quickly.
Yeah, you gotta be subtle.
Yeah, and the same thing with having like a hateable character, right? Some people will just like quit straight away.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and then his books have been critiqued as being pretentious. I can definitely see why. There are more subtle ways to approach it than having a character do a monologue.
Yeah, I was listening to him on a podcast recently, like a really old episode, and he was saying like, oh, you know, I understand that there's like a lot of criticism of my books because the teenagers are like quote unquote too smart and they act pretentiously. And I think he actually made a very good point, which is like, you know, the thing that I really hold strong against is this idea that teenagers are stupid.
Yeah,
like actually
they're smart and sensitive. They might not be able to express themselves very well, but they're very smart.
Yeah.
Going back to what Achim mentioned about hero's journey, I wanted to expand on that because I think the reason hero's journey works is because it provides an explanatory opportunity. So hero's journey usually means like the hero starts out in a world that they're familiar with, and then they are thrown into a world that they're unfamiliar with, that they have to navigate and discover. And then when that happens in the book, right, it gives the author an opportunity to explain things to the reader. Because you have to explain it to the character, and the character learns it. But what really happens is the author explaining the world building for the reader. And then that's kind of like holding the reader's hand and taking them through, like when you enter a new house and you get a house tour, kind of. And then like so that you're like less likely to just like, I don't want to know about the rest of the house. I just want to leave. And then the example is actually the book that I mentioned earlier, Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. That London above and London below is like the classic old world, familiar world, and new world hero's journey. Like the journey is literally from London above to London below.
That's right.
Yeah, I love that like manifestation of something very abstract into like a concrete story that you can really like lead people through. I'd also like to share a hook as well. I'm going to give like a very brief story first, but like, so I've been editing this essay in collaboration with the editors of Island Magazine about, you know, my relationship with climate change and doing activism, blah, blah, blah. And basically, I had this whole paragraph up the top that was like just me talking about how nice the water was. And I thought like the sentences were really nice. So I thought it was like a good initial paragraph. And then the editor was like, oh, like, let's move this like way down here because actually the second paragraph that you have has an amazing hook. And the first sentence is I've always felt like a fraud when it comes to caring about climate change.
I agree.
Yes.
And then when I saw it, I was like, oh, fuck.
Really
Yeah, you're right.
Like
now
it's obvious.
Now it's obvious, but I was too busy like talking about like how the water is shimmering and the beautiful sunset that looks like marmalade and all this crap that no one cares about. Like,
no, I think I would care about it, but after, further on.
After, yeah.
Once I'm already hooked.
Yeah, because it comes back to that point of like you want to drop your reader in a place of conflict and interest and ambiguity, but I'm just talking about how much I like the water. It's important to me. But the slightly, not really annoying, but it was a weird thing because I was looking for opening sentences to share for the hook. And I was like, oh, I really love the short story Good Old Neon by David Foster Wallace.
Nice.
So I went to go look up what was the hook for that one anyway. The first sentence is, I've been a fraud my whole life.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh.
It shows subconsciously. He has a major influence on your writing, Marlene.
I'm a fraud on so many levels. Like nothing I say is original at all.
We're all frauds.
But hey, that's the human condition, I guess, you know?
Yeah, what you said reminded me of an essay that I wrote as well. The editors actually didn't make too big of a change because I think like I started out that
because you're perfect.
No. No, on the contrary, I started that essay like very angry. So I knew immediately who I wanted to attack. And then right in the opening is conflict.
Yeah.
So in the opening, I basically straight up gave the argument that when people say culture and politics are separate, that's bullshit. And then I basically just straight up said that. And then I led the essay to kind of argue my point. And then it fits perfectly with what you were saying because the conflict is in the beginning. Right? And then this is my argument. I'm going to argue it. And then by the end, you're either convinced or not convinced. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a really great point in there, you saying that you started the essay angry because every piece of writing has an emotional momentum, right? There's a kind of gut feel or a thing that you're a bit knotted up about that you're trying to express. And sometimes it can feel tempting to bury that a little bit so that you seem neutral and a normal person. Yeah. I definitely do that. I'm I don't want people to know that I'm angry or upset about this thing, which really suffocates the writing a little bit when you're not honest and upfront about that. You should just let the emotional momentum carry it forward a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's something that's quite appealing when you are quite open and transparent with your emotions.
Yeah. If you can come across even from the very beginning that you want to have a genuine conversation, that you're not here to just try to show off how clever you are or flex, and the reader is less likely to be repulsed.
Yeah.
I want to share something as well. So I was just reminded of my own short story where I use it as a bad example because the hook didn't really work. But I received some really nice and constructive feedbacks from you guys, and then it just made me realize that I showed some promise, but I didn't meet it with I didn't meet it with resolutions in the end. So it was kind of a false promise. But later on, I just discovered something, which is also I learned from this audiobook that I shared earlier. I see it as a way to practice self-compassion. You know that the word enthusiasm or to be enthusiastic, it's comes from the Greek word enthusiasmos, which literally means to be channeled by God, which is you're in the state of an oracle where people seek you for fortune telling, for future tellings.
Oh, okay.
And then you will answer them with what the God has channeled through you.
You're connected directly to the source.
Exactly. And then
that's where your enthusiasm comes from.
Yes. And then that's gives a whole meaning of being enthusiastic. And more often than not, the answers from the God are really obscure and recondite, right? Yeah. It's it's going to be too late until you realize it all makes sense. And then I just see it as a way of my writing is I don't really need to make it make sense for the readers. I see it as a way to channel through my connections, channel through my source of storytelling. And then at least for the first draft for myself, for the first time I write for myself, right? I write for myself before I write for everyone else. And then I just feel this is more self-forgiving way of writing.
But then do you sort of go back to it and edit, and then is that where you discover what the hook might be?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah,
I mean,
sense,
a lot of creative workshops will advocate for starting with a stream of consciousness sort of thing, so you can get past, because we went to that poetry workshop together. We did stream of consciousness, and the whole point is to kind of disarm your inner critic at the beginning of the process. And then, because you have to wear different hats through the
process. I like that.
Yeah.
You have to wear a huge number of hats if you want to be a writer.
Yeah.
When you're stream of consciousing, you're an improviser, and then you're an editor, and then when you're trying to submit, you're a project manager. And then when you're working with the editors, you're a fucking high school student. And then oh my God, and when you go to events and stuff, you're a public relations person.
It's sometimes a marketer.
Yes.
I want to say something else on the topic of creating engaging stories, and it's less about hooks in general, but I just really love this example. So Salman Rushdie is one of the people who I listen to who really motivates me to create more story-driven, like event-driven kind of writing rather than the opposite, which is maybe more like language and form-driven. It is more for this like literary intelligentsia or whatever. Like you want to create something that just has a good story. Yeah, so I read Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. I read like half of it on the plane, like 12 hours straight. I'm just reading because I've just never seen someone be able to put together such amazing like plot points and strange characters, and he connects them all together. So he goes through generations of people. And I remember one of the things that really hooked me on this is, so one of the main characters is a doctor. His name is like Adam Aziz or Adam, I'm not sure which, because it's based in India. And yeah, he's a doctor, and there's this family in his town where the father is like extremely conservative and patriarchal, etc., and they're like quite conservative Muslims. And so there's a daughter in the family. Father never lets her go outside or be seen by anyone. And she has this tendency to be like sick all the time with different illnesses. And so the father of that family hires Adam as the doctor to like come and treat her every week, every time she has like a slightly different illness. And so what the father does to like preserve her like modesty or whatever is he puts this sheet over her, and he can only look through like a cut hole at the body part in question.
Whoa.
And it's just such a ridiculous idea, but the thing that makes it really compelling is like Salman Rushdie just really commits to it and continues to flesh out the detail. And so yeah, each week Adam sees a kind of like a different part of her body, and then you develop this interest in this very mysterious, like demure woman under the sheet, the same way that Adam does. And eventually when he catches sight of her face, he falls in love.
Aww.
And it kind of turns out like part of this was a ploy by the father so that she would marry a doctor.
Aww. That's so Indian.
Yeah.
That's the most Asian thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
It's ridiculous.
Okay.
But then he keeps going. Exactly.
Great hook. I'm already hooked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. But he keeps going. So they get married, and then it turns out...
through the sheet to us.
Exactly. And it like, of course, they're from two totally different worlds, because like Adam is like not nearly as conservative as she is, where she's like internalized a lot of these I guess traditions about women and men and women and how they should relate. And so anytime he tries to have sex with her, like she cries and then she yells at him and she gets really angry, and she kind of grows increasingly bitter, increasingly righteous and vindictive, and eventually like she earns the name of like Reverend Mother by the narrator of the story. And so like it's just like this intense, I don't know, this like incredibly long chain of cause and effect of crazy seeming events that also like seem to make sense in the context of the story, because they have like they change the characters' personalities and their traumas or whatever, and how they relate to other people. And yeah, it's amazing. And then that effect continues through generations in the book, basically.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds so good. And I totally get what you're saying. I think plotting is sometimes an effect that we overlook. And then like, if you can create a good plot, that is such testament to your talent. Okay, thanks for the great discussion, guys. Now we have prepared some questions for Marlene?
Because Marlene's writing is also quite heavily focused on the climate issues and sustainability. I believe we were at this event, the Elemental once, and then you asked what can art do in terms of promoting sustainability and educating the civics. And then the question is, how does writing have the power to instigate change in your view in terms of climate?
Oh, you're flipping my question on me. Very good.
So what do you think your writing has achieved in terms of your feedbacks, like personal feedbacks that you've received about like people changing their views because of your writing?
Okay, yeah. I think that's a really great question. I think the thing that is really special about writing and reading is you really have this space to engage with something in a much deeper way. like really like uninterrupted, unquestioned to an extent. Like you can really kind of take up that space to articulate a view in a lot of detail before you get sidetracked, before you address the what ifs and all those things. So I mean fundamentally, like any type of conversation is a great vehicle for change, and it's basically every form of media, right? Like, so conversations, interviews, podcasts, movies, TV shows, and then also reading and writing in all those different forms as well. But each of them have kind of their different strengths. And I think that the thing, if I compare like having a conversation, like I think having a conversation is still one of the most powerful ways to change people's minds one-on-one. But the thing that is really special about writing in particular is you can write in a way where you can talk to anyone on earth, or, assuming you're translated or whatever, you can talk to all kinds of people as long as they're kind of curious enough about it. And so you're not limited to just like people in your circles or who share your political beliefs, etc. You really have that special opportunity to go deep and access new places.
Wow.
So that's the thing that I really like, love and enjoy about writing. And I really like also the process about it and how it encourages people to question their own beliefs while they're writing. Because like once you put something on a page, it's always more obvious where the gaps in your thinking are. And so being kind of forced to do that is a really great exercise.
It really forces you to reinvestigate if your idea is truly what you imagine the word might be.
Yeah. I don't have as many examples of my writing creating this much influence, but kind of flipping it the other way, like so many of the things that have convinced me that sustainability is really important thing to focus on is books that I've read. So right. Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer is just like 200, maybe 300 pages of data and all these like really well-reasoned, but also like, quite nuanced and compassionate arguments for why we should go vegetarian. Naomi Klein's like Capitalism versus the Climate. This Changes Everything. That's a really interesting deep dive as well. And so like, especially with the climate, because it is a sensitive issue, talking to someone face to face can be really hard.
Yeah. I really respect that.
Yeah. So it's hard to create that like safety and that depth where you can engage with a different idea. And so, yeah, like most of the people I know who are in some area of impact they really care about, like they've been convinced by reading something.
Yeah, because writing changes minds, right? And the only way to change the world is to change people's minds. Yeah.
Yeah, I think reading has this amazing ability to like build your sense of intellectual and emotional humility. I guess a lot of people perceive like reading as, it's this very like, smart kind of thing, like it makes you smarter, but I don't think it's about being smart, but it's more the act of reading something at length and kind of exercising your mind to see in those different ways, to see through that author's perspective. And it's kind of a mutual act, like the author has to be good, and as a reader as well, like you also have to be able to engage and be like, like in what sense is this true? Is this what I experienced or not? So it's a very like mutual kind of meeting.
Yeah. That's why when different people read the same book, the reactions are so different.
Exactly. Yeah.
Totally. And then actually the humility itself is what makes you more intelligent.
Exactly. Yeah. Because you have that flexibility to pick up so many different types of views. And it's really like having those frameworks in place and being able to pivot very easily. That's what makes you like sound intelligent, because you can do it efficiently and quickly.
Yeah.
Not because you have more information than everyone else.
Exactly. You're so right.
Yeah. And like being ignorant of your own ignorance is what makes you stupid.
Being aware of your own ignorance, that's smart.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So you have this really interrogative and like piercing sort of writing style in your essays and creative non-fiction writings. And at the same time, you're not positioning yourself above the issues. You're not making it more patronizing. As a result, you made it more like empathetic. So is that why your Substack is called Empathy Machine?
I love how the huge build up to that one question.
Is that the question I should answer?
That's not the question. The question is like how you make it more like, how do you channel your empathy?
I think it really just comes down to being able to hold a lot of different perspectives and also understand my place within it as well.
Yeah.
That's such a great answer, Molly.
Oh,
that's a perfect answer. That explains
thank you. That's kind of just like, I guess, part of my fabric for whatever reason. And I really resonate with that quote. I can't remember who it was. They said, like, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And so I feel whenever I write, if I don't deal with the part of the writing that is just really also like just because of the way that I filter things, then it's not entirely honest. Like the only way to be anything close to be impartial is to pick apart your own lens as well. So you can kind of like triangulate a little bit closer to the truth.
Oh, pick apart your own lens. That's so beautiful.
I guess maybe also a part of it is just like being a person of many conflicted identities. Like most people are this way, but I guess to me it's very obvious the way that I am. Like, you know, even in terms of just like jobs, like I used to be like an engineer, very like hardcore, like, you know, overly logical kind of person. Used to be like a management consultant, like working for evil corporates or whatever, you know, worked at startups. So it's just this weird mix. And like a lot of those types of people tend to have very deep misunderstandings of each other.
I love that all of your like conflicting complexities, that absolutely makes you a better writer and like a better person.
And then, speaking of conflicting identities, I also have this issue
same,
like this.
same.
Yeah. How do you like make this reconciliation?
Like between the identities?
Yeah.
I guess writing is like a manifestation of that, right? Like you kind of have to lay everything out on the page and like see like, oh, does this make sense? Is there a story I can tell? And the other thing really is, other than trying to reconcile it, also trying sometimes not to bother reconciling it, right?
Yeah.
Like just let it exist.
Yeah, just accept that you're conflicted and then
that's right.
accept that you'll never fit in anywhere.
And then I was writing something about this conflicting identities, and I'm not sure if I will ever finish it, but I just
it's the story of your life. Your life,
it keeps going.
It just keeps going.
Hey, that's beautiful.
And then I realized something, that I wrote it in a way of like you're just being your own best and worst enemy, right? And you're just fighting with your other. The point of this battle, of this war, is not about like winning or just like hitting each other. It's the purpose exists in the fighting itself.
I so agree.
Yeah.
I think like having
the struggle,
having conflicts, and like it makes you a deeper person. It's like yourself is like has more depth for you to discover. So in a way, it's kind of like self-torturously rewarding. I don't know.
I understand.
Like, do you want to be complex or do you want to be happy?
That's right.
I think it's a false dichotomy, but I understand your point, right?
Okay, yeah, I think we're ready to wrap up this episode. That was a great episode. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Marlene.
Thank you, Marlene, for coming in.
Yeah, I hope you had a good time.
I did. Thanks so much for having me. I could do that for like 3 hours, to be honest.
That's what we
let's
did
just keep going.
Yeah.
Screw the studio.
Yes, more questions.
Okay, we hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it. This is the podcast Licensed Poetics. I'm your host, Fanli.
And I'm your host, Achim.
Okay, we'll see you in our next episode. Bye.
Till then, bye.
Bye.
If you are the dealer, I'm out of the game. If you are the healer, means I'm broken and lame.